This morning, we've been asked to join with a bunch of churches in the community just to pray for our country and pray for unity in the churches. So I'm going to do that as we lead into the message this morning. So join me in prayer. Jesus, we are forever grateful that you decided to join us here, walk on this planet, give us a picture of what unity looks like. Give us a picture of what it means to be human, fully human. And you asked when you left that we would be one, that the Spirit would come and unify us, and I pray for that today. That prayer never goes away. That prayer is the heart of what it means to be a Jesus follower. And we want to be a part of something that is bigger than us. We want to be a part of something that actually is the miracle of being followers of you. Is that we can focus on you, pursue you, even in the midst of all the differences that we have. I pray for that today. I pray the differences would fade. They would not become reasons for division among people who follow you. It would become something that would allow us to unite. I pray that our relationship with you would be enriched and deepened as we get to know people that think and believe a little bit different than we do. Lord, I pray that you be with us this morning as we look into your word, as we hear from you. May you guide us, direct us, and may your Spirit fill us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Well, this morning we continue our series called The Clash, and it is a look at how some of the things of the Bible clash with our culture. And this morning I get the privilege of doing discipleship in an age of information. And I'm going to just start with a couple of assumptions as we dive into this together. And the first couple of assumptions is this. Information is available today in mass quantities, but accurate information takes a little more work. We have more information available to us than we ever have, and it's at your fingertips. You carry it with you wherever you go, and I know you know this, so I'm assuming you know this. If you don't know this, we'll talk later. Second thing is, I want to give you a quick, when I say discipleship, I'm meaning it is an intentional process of becoming the person you or me want to be, and that information serves a purpose in being discipled, but it is not the means of discipleship. So information basically is a subset of discipleship. When information is used as a tool in discipleship, it is very, very powerful. So we are more apt as humans to believe information when it is repeated over and over again. If we hear the same thing over and over and over, we begin to assume that it is true or accurate. Whether it is or not is irrelevant. Because if so many people are believing it's true, we have a tendency to believe it. The second thing is the information is communicated. We have more apt to believe when people who we respect are communicating it. So if somebody you respect says it, it has so much more weight than it does if somebody you don't respect or don't believe. I know you know all this, but I'm just reinforcing it as we go through. We are more apt to believe information when it resonates with a deep belief we already hold, also known as values. So if you hear a piece of information and it resonates within you and you go, yeah, that sounds right, it's striking something in you that says that's a value of mine. And so I agree. And we are more apt to believe something when the information stokes fear in us, stokes anger in us, or stokes joy in us. Emotions play a role in this. So that's how I want to kind of work with information as we dance through this a little bit. So what does it mean to be discipled? Generally speaking, we all are being discipled most of the time by someone or something. Marketing works in the realm of discipleship. The repetitive nature of it, the trying to strike a chord of value with you, the idea of trying to either provoke you to fear or provoke you to anger, all of those things within marketing are used to get you to move towards whatever it is they're trying to get you to buy. Our whole culture is built on this idea. And then it's amplified. And so, generally speaking, you are being discipled. So when we learn, we are being discipled by the information that is shaping the way we think, shaping our values, shaping our behaviors, and then ultimately it changes us. It is a process, and it usually starts passively because we start in a passive environment when we're born. And so oftentimes we don't think through how we're discipled. And so it takes us, in order for it to be intentional, to be very self-aware. And a lot of us just aren't, myself included. We all have blind spots. So lasting discipleship will be rooted in information coupled with meaningful relationships. And I'm not just talking about following Jesus. I'm just talking about it in general. So if there's lasting relationship or meaningful relationship coupled with information that resonates with a core value that you have or a belief that you have, that'll stick. And your behavior will follow. So, what is the target of intentional disciple making or intentionally moving us through the process? Is it our behavior? Is it our minds? Is it our hearts? What is it? Yeah, short answer is all of those things. But I believe this. The Bible speaks to this specifically, and this is where we're going to dive in, is that our behavior is the evidence of our hearts. Our behavior is the presenting part of how we've been discipled. How we live our lives is largely the overflow of our hearts. And so Jesus puts it this way, Matthew 12, verses 33 through 37. I'm going to share this same truth two different ways. He talks about it in Matthew 12, and he talks about it in Luke 6. So in Matthew 12, 33 through 37, it says, a tree is identified by its fruit. If a tree is good, its fruit will be good. If a tree is bad, its fruit will be bad. You brood of snakes, how could evil men like you speak what is good and right? For whatever is in your heart determines what you say. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. And I tell you this, you must give an account on Judgment Day for your every idle word you speak. The words you say will either acquit you or condemn you. And then in Luke chapter 6, verses 43 through 49, Jesus says, a good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. He says it in the negative. A tree is identified by its fruit. Figs are neither gathered from thorn bushes, and grapes are not picked from bramble bushes. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart. So why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, when you don't do what I say? I will show you what it's like when someone comes to me, listen to my teaching, and then follows it. It is like a person building a house who digs deep and lays the foundation on a solid rock. When the floodwaters rise and break against that house, it stands firm because it is well built. But anyone who hears and doesn't obey is like a person who builds a house right on the ground without a foundation. When the floods sweep down against that house, it will collapse into a heap of ruins. Jesus uses two of the most common everyday illustrations to illustrate his point. And it is common knowledge. What I'm telling you today is really, really a known truth. Is that if you walk up to an apple tree and you pick off an apple, you're expecting that fruit to reflect the condition of the tree. And you're expecting an apple. And you're expecting what comes from the roots of that tree to produce that which you will reap. But the condition of the fruit is not based on the fruit itself. It's the result, obviously, of the roots. Same true with a house or a foundation. If the foundation's not good, the house isn't going to stand. And he uses these real simple illustrations to point out this is how life works. This is how a human works. A human works in the same way. The condition of the heart is shown or demonstrated in the life they lead. And so he's inviting them into this unique relationship. He's inviting them into a relationship that ultimately will cultivate their heart. It will move them to a place that is different. It will cause them to change. I also want to say this. These are absolute statements that he makes here. And I've never met anybody whose heart is completely good and a heart that is completely evil. And there are parts of each of us that produce behaviors that we don't like, that we could wish we could get back, which we have to work on. And then there are cracks in the foundation on houses. Doesn't mean the whole foundation is bad. It means that we need to do some work. And the large part of this is that it's a process. And I want to help you, and I want me and you to wrestle with what is the idea of the process of cultivating the heart. What needs to change in me? What do I need to do? What nourishment does my heart need to change me? That's discipleship. So if our behavior is the evidence of how we have been discipled, and our heart is the source of our behavior, here's a couple questions I'd like you to ponder. The first one is this: was your heart shaped intentionally or randomly? Did you choose the path in which your heart now finds itself? How did you participate in the shaping of your heart? Can you identify people that you want to be like in some area of your life? Early in our lives, we are shaped by our families because we have no choice. The culture, the values, everything about it you're immersed in, and it shapes your life. Most of our disciple making takes place in ways that are not intentional. We receive them passively because we were taught to receive them passively from the environment we grew up in. So with that, life events happen, things shape us. We are passive or immersed in an environment like a family, like your place where you work, like your high school, like college, neighborhood, a church. All those cultures shape you. And you learn how to function in each of them. And each of them do things to us to shape the way that we live. So some of them instilled values in you, some of them didn't. For me, my family is probably the most instilled the most values in me, and I'm going to share with you what they are. The first one was to work hard. That was probably the number one value of my family. Work hard. The second one is be responsible and trustworthy, and you will do well with us. The third one is live up to your name. Don't disgrace the name. The fourth one was keep your word. Always follow through. And the last one was follow Jesus. It's about right. And so these were the highest values in my life because I knew I was expected to live them out everywhere I went. So they were central. They shaped how I treated others. So first of all, I judged people on these values. If you didn't have the same values and you didn't do the same things, I judged you because those were the values I lived by. And so I also looked for people with these values to be my friends. And then I was most comfortable, I found, with people when I was around people with this shared values. It's common sense. It's human nature. But oftentimes we never sit down and ask, why do I connect with this person and not that person? till we get older. Then we start asking questions. Values always cut both ways. They divide. They're good, and then they're not so good, depending upon the circumstance and the situation. I'm going to tell you a story that brings us together. When I was 16, my dad ran a few grocery stores, and he always wanted his boys to work for him. I was the youngest, and I didn't want to. So I worked for another guy by the name of Fritz Nelke at a pizza place. Fritz was a guy that bought the pizza place from his father-in-law. And in buying the pizza place from his father-in-law, he had had a heart attack while working in the Chicago area business arena. I can't remember exactly who he worked for, but it was a high-stress, high-position job that he had a lot of money, but he couldn't do it anymore. He shook when he would stand. And he was probably in his 40s. But he looked like he was in his 60s. And every day, the pizza place opened at 4 o'clock, so we had to be there at 4 o'clock. And he would always be there. He'd be sitting in one of the booths. It was a tiny little place. And he'd be smoking Pall Malls. You know what Pall Malls are? They're cigarettes that have no filter. And there's an ashtray sitting there, and he'd be reading either the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, which as a 16-year-old kid meant nothing to me. Absolutely nothing. And I would walk in, and we usually have some casual conversation, and he'd be smoking his cigarettes, and I'd do my job. Well, one day I walked in, I remember this vividly. I'd been working for him for about a year, and he had asked me a couple questions the day before, and he had said, "Why do you still work here?" Because most people only last a few months. And because he was hard to work for. He was a hard person. And I laughed, and I said, "I need the job, and I'm saving for a car." And he goes, "Yeah, but you could work somewhere else." And I said, "I'm not working for my dad, and I really don't want to go through the hassle of trying to find another job." And so I don't mind the work. It's hard work. It's a little stressful at times. And you're a jerk, but that's the way it goes. And he knew he was. And he said, "Well, I have a question for you today." And I said, "Yeah, what's the question?" He said, "Sit down." I sat down across from him in the booth. And he said, "Are you a Republican or a Democrat?" And I said, "Fritz, I'm 16. I'm neither of those things, and nor do I care." And I said, "I have no way of even knowing if I'm a Republican or a Democrat." He laughed. He thought that was funny. And he said, "Well, let me ask you a question." He said, "Do you think people ought to get things for free, or do you think people should work for what they get?" I said, "That's a no-brainer. They ought to work for what they get." And he goes, "Well, then you're a Republican." And that was the end of the conversation. And so I got up and I went to work. Never gave it a lot of thought, but it stuck. I was being discipled. What happened in that moment was this: somebody I respected, I had relationship with, tapped into one of my core values and spoke into my life in a way that didn't even feel like it at the moment. It was completely passive. And it took me a while. Like, people would ask me after that, like, "Are you Republican or Democrat?" "I'm a Republican." No one ever asked me why. No one ever asked me how I made that decision. They just went, "Oh, okay." Well, back then it was less volatile and less stupid as it is now. But as I got older, I started to ask the question, how did I become a Republican? And as I got older, I began to, that value that it stuck with, because it stuck with that value, work hard. And I judged people based upon that. And then I coupled it with, as I got older, I also began to understand Fritz better. And as I got older, I also began to see how it deviated from some of the things that I had learned about following Jesus. So somebody could ask me today, "What are you, a Republican or a Democrat?" And I would say, A, none of your business. B, neither. C, I prefer to be a follower of Jesus. I don't want to be labeled by anything else. Now, as a 16-year-old, It just seemed logical. No, no, Siri, don't. I don't know what I said. That's the struggle with putting this thing up here. So it aligned me with something I never intended. Because again, I want to tell you, this is really important. It hit three things. It hit my core values. It hit the person that talked to me was somebody I respected and believed. And I was passive. So, another example. I was taught as a young boy, God helps those who help themselves. Ever hear this? No? Yeah? Yeah. And as you hear it, and it rolled off of people's lips, and it was part of the culture I grew up in, made perfect sense to me. Why? Because it hit my values. Follow Jesus. Okay. How do I do that? Work hard. Do what's right. Honor your word. All of these things just aligned. And so, as bad a theology as that is, that God only helps those who help themselves, it was part of the way I was discipled. And so it's not just possible to be discipled into the wrong idea of living everyday life. It's possible that you could be discipled. I was discipled in ways that taught me wrong theology. And so that was also one. Seminary. I was in seminary for 3 years. And it was great for some things and lousy for others. What it was great as, it taught me the value of reading and gathering information. But all the reading I had to do over that 3-year period of time, I cannot even begin to tell you. And they ask you, how much did you read? So part of my core values was I got to tell the truth. And so I would tell them I only did 70% of it because I've got a job and I got to pay for this. And none of them cared. But all the reading I did, I didn't have time to let it change me. It became just a gathering of information, which is true of a lot of education, but at seminary, it's really true, at least the one I went to. And the amount of information that I accumulated might have made me a little smarter, but it didn't change me foundationally. It didn't affect my heart. I didn't allow it in. And I was going to be a pastor, and a lot of the information they were giving me was relevant to pastoring. Some of it was, some of it wasn't. And so it wasn't until I was in the pastorate for a while where I began to see it played out by other pastors that I respected and trusted that it actually started to sink in. So I started to couple the information with what I was seeing in other people's lives, mistakes and right things. And I began to be discipled by it, by the information. But up until then, it was just information I knew. I know a lot of pastors when I was growing up and in the ministry that knew a lot but didn't apply any of it, which was shocking to me, but true. So, information without application is just knowledge. Makes you think you're smart. It wasn't until I watched others, until I actually began to see, I actually have to live a different way. Okay, a phrase I want to give you that took me a while to kind of grasp. We are often unaware of how we are shaped until we exit an environment or someone says, why do you do that? We are often unaware of how we are shaped until we exit an environment or someone says, why do you do that? When we leave home, it is often that first encounter with somebody else's house or somebody else's environment that is a kind of a rude awakening. A simple illustration, I was invited to have lunch at my girlfriend's house when I was 15 years old. Her mom was making grilled cheese sandwiches and soup for lunch. And they invited me. They said, hey, would you like to have lunch with us? And I said, what are we having? And she said, grilled cheese and soup. Anybody have grilled cheese and soup for lunch? Do you know what that is? It could be tomato, or it could be chicken noodle. Either way, go either way. Most people have tomato. I don't like tomato soup, but I'm picky. And I said, I really don't like grilled cheese sandwiches, but I'll have some soup. And I sat down at the table, and she brought out something I'd never seen before. Grilled cheese sandwiches that weren't black. I said, wait a minute. What is that? And she said, that's a grilled cheese sandwich. It has, she told me, Swiss with cheddar, and I was used to Velveeta or Cheese Whiz on white bread, and it was dripping with butter, and it was toasted brown, and I was discipled. Do you know how good those are? Right? Until I got out of an environment that said, here's a grilled cheese sandwich with the Velveeta cheese and Wonder Bread with no butter, just burnt, that you had to have soup to dunk it in to eat, to, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I couldn't stop eating those things, and I think they were a little annoyed. But you know how it's like to have something like change in front of you? The realization of, oh, it isn't like that for everybody. That isn't what I thought it was. There can be good grilled sandwiches. Anyway, so I had been conditioned to believe something that wasn't true. So have you. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know if what you know is really true until it's exposed. Everything changed for me when my older brother told me that Christianity is not what we were told. I was 17 years old. My brother had gone to college. He came home from college, and he goes, man, I need to talk to you. He had been exposed to a different brand of Christianity. He had been exposed to what it means to follow Jesus rather than just be afraid of going to hell. And he was so interested in sharing it with me. It was great. We had great conversations. But what it did for me was it took a respected person, my older brother, new information, which I needed. It connected with a core value of mine, which was follow Jesus, and he discipled me. He embodied it, and it changed my life. Just changed my life. You don't know what you don't know until somebody tells you different. So let's get practical. Let's talk about the process. Knowledge alone will not change your heart. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through this. You can reject it. You can ask me questions. You can do what you want with it. I do believe this works. If we do it. But so first thing you do is need to assess the fruit in your life, in my life. And so this requires what I would say is a key attribute: humility. It is the honest assessment of what's going on around me as I affect the lives of others. Without assigning blame to anyone, this one took me a few minutes. This one took me years to kind of wrestle through as I began to assess the fruit in my life, was I wanted to assign blame to people who treated me wrong or discipled me wrong. I had to own it in order to change it. And so there needs to be a humble assessment. And oftentimes we have blind spots, so it's best to include close friends, a therapist maybe if you need, to help you see this. It takes great humility to do this. That's step one. If you never do this, it's hard to get to step two. So assess the fruit in your life. How's the foundation? Step two, ask the question, what are my core values? What do I live out of? This requires a key attribute called honesty. Just have to be really honest. I had to be really honest with mine because it's the measuring stick that you apply to other people. It is my core values. They're not the world's core values. They're not yours. They're mine. They've been instilled in me somehow, some way. And write them down. And the best way to do this, I found, is to ask the question, where do I spend my money? Where do I spend my time? And where do I use my talents? And you'll find your core values. You'll find them. Again, a little bit of pain involved with this, and I think pain is a great motivator. And then you have to ask a question, do I want to change any of these core values? And then, how does these two things, how does my fruit and my core values align with my faith, my behavior and my core values? One more key attribute, self-awareness. You have to be aware. And so it takes a little bit of work. I think the process demands work. I don't think you will passively fall into this. I know I didn't. I still don't. I get passive periodically, and I can tell. My behavior exposes me. So how do I align these things? First of all, it takes time. It's a process. You can't flip a switch. It is repetition. As a Jesus follower, we have a person we can see. So we study the life of Jesus. That's why we focus on what we call a center set church. We're trying to revolve around who Jesus is, not a bunch of borders and rules. The focal point is a person. The focal point is a life following that person. We need to be willing participants in the change. And ultimately, discipleship requires us to change. It requires a change of heart first. So the question I ask us, me, you, what am I feeding my heart that is in contrary to the way I want to be? So in other words, what is the biggest influence, information-wise and relationally, on my heart? I wrote down a few that, this is a never-ending list, but this requires, again, for you to do some work. What is it that's tweaking your heart? Is it social media? Do you get on social media and just go, wow, this is... If it's crushing your soul and feeding your heart to a place where you find yourself just being angry, my encouragement is don't do that anymore. Be informed, but don't let it consume you. Is it YouTube videos of cats doing stupid stuff? That might be escapism, I'm not sure. Maybe you listen to the wrong podcast or the right podcast. Maybe it's a 24-hour news station that's TV, news station that you listen to or watch. Maybe it's music. One that I wrote down that did me in for a while was talk radio. It just made me angry. Why I listened to it is beyond me, but it shaped my heart. And my wife would ask me when I got out of the car at the end of the day, were you listening to talk radio on your way home? Yeah. She knew it would agitate me. What is it for you that's feeding your heart? Is it feeding your heart in such a way that it actually moves you towards what you want, or is it moving you away from it? What people are influencing your heart? Are there people in your life that move you towards the direction you want to go? Are there people in your life that move you away from the direction you want to go? It's one of the harder things to do in life. It's to not just pick people that resonate with your fears, or not just pick people that resonate with your core values, not just pick people who resonate with agreement. Because we create echo chambers. We just want to hear back what we believe. We naturally do that. Find somebody else that will break the echo. So some questions to ponder. We live in what makes us comfortable, and we create a system to reinforce our beliefs. It requires us to ask the question, are my beliefs producing good fruit? Am I treating people the way I want to? Am I in a community that has the values and fruit you're looking for, even though there might not be yours? And can I join in and participate? Find a few persons that you think are living out what you are looking for and start building relationships with them. This goes both ways. Look for people you can invest in. Find persons that bring joy to your life, that lighten your existence. I think it's absent today. Find persons with whom you can bring joy to their lives. Pay attention to the condition of your heart. Are you less fearful, more trusting? Less angry, more joyful? Less condemning, more forgiving? In an age of information, all the information you need is at your fingertips. What's feeding your heart? What's feeding your soul? I know this is somewhat elementary, but also it prompts one of the deeper questions for all of us. What does my life actually look like as I try to follow Jesus? I'd love to take your questions if you have any. If you don't have any, I would love not to take your questions. You can text them in also. I answer those throughout the week.
Sorry, joking on the mic. Never used one of these things before.
Yes.
I think the most obvious question is like, if social media makes you angry, like stay off of it. But like, knowledge is power, and like you have to be informed. And so, what is the correct way to engage with information? To like, especially in times when it feels, for the safety of our neighbors, for ourselves, that kind of thing, like really important to be informed.
Yeah.
How do you do that while keeping like a sense of balance?
Yeah, I think it has more to do with the source of the information than it does information itself. I think we have so many different sources of information that we often don't. You know, you said it to me the other day, Layla, don't trust every source on the internet. And this is very true. But we have a tendency to believe that which feeds our core values. We have a tendency to believe those things that connect with us, or we have a tendency to connect that which is repeated to belief. And so and what I would say is, do the work. If you're going to believe it and repeat it, and you're going to allow it to seep into your very being, then make sure it's accurate. So you got to do the work. You can't read a headline and go, that's it, that's right. Because it resonates with you, because it sounds right, and it sounds true, but we don't do the work of, oh, maybe that wasn't true. I think that's the never-ending, perpetual thing on the internet, is that people repeat that which isn't necessarily true. And because it speaks to people, and they want it to be true. So you got to do the work. I don't know how else to do it. And if you don't have time to do the work, stay off the internet. I mean, that's the reality of it. Or don't believe everything you read. Don't let it feed your soul.
Good morning.
It's debatable.
We're here. Your number one core value was work hard.
Yep.
So, and I'm not disagreeing with you here. I'm going to work this out in real
I'm not
time.
telling you those core values are right.
Right. I've got a question at the end of this.
Okay.
So your number one core value was work hard. And one of the things I resonate with a lot in Jesus' message is, you know, my yoke is easy, my burden is light.
Yeah.
Jesus is not going to run you ragged.
Right.
And the reason I'm asking, how did you work that out with your core value? The reason I'm asking that is because right now I'm in a season of, I feel like I'm getting run ragged by work.
Yeah.
And it's become a big challenge here in the last probably 3, 4, 6 months. And I'm just wondering how you worked that out, and if you've worked that out.
That's
if
a
you
great question.
have any something to speak into that. Advice, maybe.
Great question. Not one I expected. I have managed over the years. Okay, first a confession. I passed these core values on to my children, and I see them playing out. They work all the time. So my confession is, I didn't do a good job of this when I was young. As I've gotten older, I've seen the fallacy of if I work harder, it will get better. Because it's basically, I bought that lie. I bought the lie, work harder, work more, and it'll work itself out. It's just not true. Work smarter. I've learned how to work smarter. I've learned how to manage my time better. But ultimately what I did was I lowered that value and raised relationship. And so I started to ask the question, is this necessary or is this necessary? And I started to migrate in this direction. Do I struggle with it to this day? Yes, because it was instilled in me from the time I was born. There are times when I don't work where I feel extremely guilty. But I'm doing something to invest in someone else that isn't this. And I've learned to gravitate to the idea that this has more eternal consequence than this. And it helps me move in this direction. Is it a struggle? Mm-hmm. And it might be for you for the rest of your life, because it is for me. I'll probably be 80 years old trying to figure out what I can get done today. In all seriousness. But I've tried to also take relationship and put it in the category of good work. Does that help? Okay.
Hi.
Hey.
So I love to engage in other communities, right? And as someone that came to know Christ in my 20s, I was the friend that my friends would like get exhausted by, because if someone came knocking at the door or at a restaurant and wanted to engage in those like philosophical religious questions, I was all in.
Yeah.
I also have such a sensitive spirit that sometimes I'd walk away from those just feeling battered and beaten and like I let that person down, or that I didn't represent Jesus well, or
Right.
so what's the rub between, not trying to convince my Jewish father that like Jesus is the only way or I'm a failure, versus just being someone that engages but also protects my heart and my sanity of being a type A, not wanting to let the world down.
I don't know anybody like that. Here's my general. When I was young, I was sold this idea that you had to convince them that to believe like you. You had to convince them that Jesus was real. There were certain things involved in that, and it was a lot of words. And as I've aged, I'm much more interested in being their friend. I'm much more interested in listening. I'm much more interested in letting them see inside of my life than I am telling them anything anymore. I think the invitation is, let's just be in relationship. I don't have to convince you of anything. If you don't believe in Jesus, that's between you and Jesus, not between me, you, and Jesus. But if you want to know, that door's always open. The door's always open. I'll talk to you about Jesus anytime. But I allow them the initiation. I build enough relationship that allows for, because there's usually a prompted question. I've got neighbors that prompt that question all the time because they know I'm a pastor, right? It's not because we're in deep relationship. It's because they've run up against something that doesn't quite make sense. And they see me as the Bible answer man. That's a different type of deal, right? For those of you who are unaware, there's a shell answer man too. But the Bible answer man is, and I usually say, hey, can we have coffee instead? Let's just talk. It prompts an opportunity for relationship and conversation. That's it. Okay. It's hard to do, especially if you want to save them, because you can't.
There's one online if you want one more.
Sure, one more.
Can you tell us of a time when you looked at your values and needed to change your career/lifestyle?
How many? Being a pastor, I moved from being in a church that was in the suburbs of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It was in Hershey, Pennsylvania. It was very large. And I went to a church that was in Harrisburg, which was 10 miles away. And in that move, I went from being in a very affluent community to a very poor community. I went from being in a very conservative community to a very liberal community. I went from a very white community to a very diverse community. I don't know how else to say that. And it challenged all of my core values, all of them. What it looked like to follow Jesus there was totally different than what it was to follow Jesus in the suburbs. And so as I navigated that and I was introduced to a bunch of people who believed different than I did about what it looked like to love one another and to help one another and to do it in such a way that they were working hard, but they could never get ahead. They were working hard and never had enough to help somebody. I had to put aside all of those ideas, my preconceived ideas of what meant blessing. And so joining with a group of people that were totally different than the people that I would normally had been a part of, it took all of my core values and kind of threw them up in the air because they were, other than following Jesus, they were never the criteria by which Jesus used to decide who was worthy. It was just mine. That's the challenge. Is can I put aside all those things that I think are of that much importance to love people and it changed the way I pastor, it changed the way I look at people, it changed the way I looked at politics, it changed the way I looked at life. I had never met a group of people that were trying that hard and were that oppressed that I was a part of. Changed everything. It's a great question. I'm going to invite you to come to communion this morning, but also I just want to remind you that we pray every week over the prayer requests that are put up on our board. You write out one, and we pray over them every week. And I want to encourage you. We want to pray for you. We want to be a part of what's going on in your life. If you want to give to the community, there's boxes here, there's places online to give. But communion this morning, I just want you to see that Jesus' invitation is always this. It's always the same thing over and over again. If you follow me, you can't help but be like me. So the closer we get and the more attuned we are with who Jesus is, the more that life changes, the values shift, but also he puts people in our lives that expose our need to change. I just invite you into that. And I think communion is a way that we acknowledge that we need to change. Just want to invite you to that this morning. Let me pray and we'll sing. Jesus, thank you that you allow us the privilege of process. You don't expect us to change immediately. You don't expose all the things that we need to change overnight. Little by little, you expose us to what we need to be exposed to so that we can make the changes that you invite us to, that we'd be able to love you, love one another in a way that bears fruit, that somehow the world would get it, that you are the Son of God, that you died for us, and there's new life to be had. In Jesus' name, amen.